Good morning. It's good to be with you this morning on a nice chilly morning. It's funny, years ago when I was at Harding, was Joe Jones still teaching? Okay. The School of Biblical Studies, in fact, when I started there, it was called the Christian Communication Program, CCP. Later changed the name. 2-year preacher training course that Don and I shared. He came along after I did, and when there was a instructor by the name of Joe Jones, great guy, and he taught introductory class, one of the first classes we had, and the first exam on it were things that he thought everybody that's going to be a preacher should know. Do you still do that? And part of it was to list the books of the Bible. Now, I was so ahead of you, there were only 58 books at that time, so, but it was, so there's like 20 of us in this class, and we're taking this exam, and the last question was, list the books of the Bible. And more than once, you heard, from these guys, and that was their way of remembering the books. It works, and it was humorous because we could all relate. We all knew the song, and that's how they could make it through the exam, was to sing under their breath that song. But they had to hum the tune to be able to do it. We're talking this morning about honor. We'll talk about a call to honor. And I want you to understand that everything that we do to the glory of God. And God teaches us, I want you to submit yourselves for the Lord's sake. He's going to talk about our responsibility to submit ourselves to government. And I want to reiterate this because it's become to where, as we lose God in this culture, so many things are coming undone. And it's just, at some point, this is going to reach a perfect storm where, for instance, if you're first in line in the left turn lane, you're responsible for the 7th car behind you making it through. You see, when the light turns green, you've got all the time in the world until it turns yellow for you to turn. But that 7th car back there is depending on you being aware, not being on your phone, being vigilant, and when that turns, when the light turns, to turn. But how often do we think about the 7th car behind us? You see, that's how Christ thought. He thought in terms of others. And I want us to understand that has become so counterculture, to put others first, to not leave your shopping cart in the middle of the aisle when you wander off looking for something. It's very basic things, but there's thousands of them. And when they all start failing, then people say, wow, people have gotten so rude, and what's happened is we've become less Christ-like. Because that's where our manners come from. That's where our training came from, was the principles of serving others, etc. And it comes down to government as well. Submit yourself for the Lord's sake. It's service to God. And it's important that we do it for God. This can also be an affront to God if we don't. It's a rejection of God's authority. Because all authority comes from Him. There is no government that exists that is not His. In Romans chapter 13, it says, let every person be in submission to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God. And those which exist are established by God. Therefore, he who resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God. And they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will receive praise for the same. For it authority, governors, those that represent them, is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger, who brings wrath upon the one who practices evil. So what Paul is writing is, all government has been established by God. It's a servant of God. In fact, it's an avenger on behalf of God. You want to be okay with government? Submit. Because in doing that, you're submitting to God. Submit for the Lord's sake. In fact, 1 Peter 2 says, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it's to a king as one in authority, as to governors as sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Guys, our country is running the risk of coming apart at the seams, and much of it has to do with this. And it's so counterhuman. It's so hard to understand. Why in the world would I submit to an authority that's oppressing me? Why in the world would I subjugate myself? And the reason is because God established it. The reason God established government is to create order and a certain amount of safety, and civilizations cannot work without this. So Christians have to understand our role, and our role is submission. Now, he doesn't only say that, he says, I also want you to give thanks for them. Let me stop here. Paul is writing about honoring Nero. Nero is going to kill Paul. Nero was one of the most ungodly human beings and an ungodly emperor. He was evil to the core. But God put him in that position. Sometimes God uses evil toward a good purpose. He did it with Nebuchadnezzar, he did it with on and on and on. It's not ours to judge that. It's not ours try to figure out how is God moving. And I think sometimes in our past, we have failed to realize that God doesn't just move in America. And he doesn't just move in the Old Testament. He is the creator and sustainer of all that is. Therefore, he creates this structure, and it's not for ours to validate. It's not for us to determine, well, I will if they do what is right, because they don't do what is right. They do what gives order. And that order sometimes comes with tremendous brutality. But God instituted this. And you see, it starts with learning to honor my parents. It learns to submit to my parents and then submit to authorities. I read an article recently about a school bus driver, and she was writing about her experience as a school bus driver. And she was driving mainly 4th and 5th grade students to school. And she was talking about the unruliness. She was talking about the worst names she's ever been called in life. She was called by 4th and 5th graders. I don't know about you, but had I ever given trouble to a bus driver, then it wasn't about being a bus driver. It was about being a person in authority and responsibility. That person, and what she wrote was, would you rather me keep your children safe, constantly watching traffic, or turn around and discipline your kids? Because if I turn around and discipline your kids, we won't be home by the end of the week. And she was trying to say that's your responsibility. And you're failing in your response. And that's from a bus driver, much less teachers, and on and on and on. We have a culture that is not teaching and is not demonstrating this respect for whoever is in authority. I've told you before, my dad deputized every man in the church to discipline me. He had help. I didn't have a chance. I was whipped by more deacons than, because they had the authority. He said, you don't need to come to me. You don't need to, just if you see him doing something. You know how kids back in those days, you go outside and run around the building and just be kids. And when we got destructive, anybody could call us down. There were eyes everywhere. And the idea was, and then what happens when you get home? I hear you got in trouble with Deacon Jim. Well, you know what's going to happen because you got in trouble with Deacon Jim? Now you're in trouble with me. And that was like double jeopardy to me. But you didn't respect his authority, and that means you don't respect mine. And we need to learn respect for authority. So Jesus said, submit to all authority. Paul said, submit to all authority. Jesus submitted to King Herod. Jesus submitted to the Sanhedrin. Jesus submitted to Pontius Pilate. And what were they going to do with him? Kill him. Jesus submitted to the cross, which was the implement of judgment of the Romans. A man who had done nothing wrong, who if anybody had a right to rise up, and the Jews expected him to rise up. They expected him to go to war and to lead a war. They expected him to revile authority, evil authority. And he subjected himself, submitted to them to death because he submitted to the will of his Father. And ironically, his father had put Pontius Pilate in position because all authority comes from God. He submitted to the will of his murderers. Well, where's justice? Where's vengeance? It's coming. That's what he understood. First of all, then, I urge it that entreaties and prayers, petitions, and thanksgivings be made on behalf of all men, for kings and all who are in authority, in order that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. That word means honesty, integrity, and being respectful. First Amendment to our Constitution gives us a right to peaceful demonstrations of a problem that we have with our government. Peaceful. God expects that to be done with honor. God expects that to be done with respect. God expects that to be done with thanksgiving for those who are in that role. And he doesn't say, based upon your acceptance of their morality, he doesn't say, based upon your judgment of whether what they're doing is good for you or not. He said, do it. Learning to submit to authority is fundamental to us being able to get along. Because there will always, and guys, without authority and submission to authority, there cannot be civilization. Now, our Constitution gives us the freedom, peaceful assembly. Now, our court, Supreme Court or whatever, have defined that to the point that someone can stand in the face of that authority and shout and scream and call them names and incite them to violence. Our Constitution has given that. Our courts, rather, have given that. God didn't. And this is a tough lesson. And it's one of the most difficult for us to learn because there is a lot of evil in power. How could Paul instruct respect for those who would kill him? Because there's no authority except from God. And if that's the case, then Nero was a minister of God. That's a hard pill to swallow. But it's true. How can disciples honor and give thanks for regimes that oppose them? Because it's not about you. In fact, if only through your death do you honor God, then die with integrity. And that's what he said. Pray for all who are in power, that we may live in dignity and even die in dignity, if that is. But you see, the American way is to rise up. American way is to be Braveheart. American way is to take up a gun, and that's how we were founded. That's not God's way. God's way is submission. And that seems weak, doesn't it? Didn't the scripture say that Jesus despised the shame of the cross and the scourging, and that he could have called 10,000 angels, but he didn't, because he honored government, because he honored his Father. But how's God going to handle the regime, whatever the regime is? He doesn't bless their methods, but he blesses their authority. He will deal with bad actors. He will deal with horrible methods. What we've been learning on Wednesday nights about these regimes, going all the way back to the Assyrian Empire and then the Persian Empire and all of that, is how God takes empire and he destroys other empires with it. And then he'll turn around and destroy them with another empire. And he's using all that to get his people where he wanted them to be. And by the way, he used an empire he used Assyria to take the northern kingdom into captivity, and he used the Babylonians to take the southern kingdom. And I'm afraid the church would have sided with the Israelites that God was disciplining. I'm afraid that Americans would go too bad and oppose God by opposing Syria for opposing God's people. You see how complicated this gets? If you're trying to figure out God's way, because you don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes. You don't necessarily know that Assyria was brought to power by God to discipline, to almost destroy the northern kingdom. Yet that's exactly what he was using it for. And he had predicted it, and he did it. Would we oppose the Assyrians, who are going to discipline Israel almost to the point of demise? I'm afraid we would. Because we would say, but that's an evil empire. God was using. Did the same thing with Pharaoh. He has through history and is doing it now. He will deal with bad actors. He will deal with horrible methods. That's not ours to determine. And guys, I know this is tough, but I'm going to tell you something. If we don't learn as a nation to do what God wills, we're going to tear ourselves apart. And we've begun in so many ways. How many times have demonstrations turned to riots? How many times have people gone to a demonstration and end up dead? Just recently. And it's because honor is not being presented by anyone. Thanksgiving is not being presented. And certainly submission. But submission is not the American way. Then it will destroy us. Because God will use an ungodly regime to bring us to our knees if we don't go to our knees. He's done it over and over, and he will do it again. Because vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. I alone have the wisdom to know who's right and wrong. I didn't say good and bad. Who's right and wrong. Israel was wrong. Assyria was right in what they were doing with them because God caused it to happen. Nebuchadnezzar, same thing. Darius, Cyrus, same thing. Alexander the Great, same thing. And in all of that, he's promoting his methodology in the world, not anybody else's, except those who submit to him. God's ways are too far above our ways to anticipate and certainly to judge. 2 Peter 2, verse 9. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation, how to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the flesh in the corrupt desires and despise authority. Daring self-will, they do not tremble when they revile angelic majesties, whereas angels, who are in greater in might and power, do not bring a reviling judgment against them before the Lord. But these, like unreasoning animals, born as creatures of instinct to be captured and killed, reviling where they have no knowledge, will in the destruction of those creatures also be destroyed. God has said there are people who are going to be just like animals, whose only purpose is to be hunted and killed. We don't like hearing that because we're humanists, us Greeks. But it's true. And one of the demonstrations of them is they do not respect authority. But now Christ has been raised from the dead, first fruit of those who are asleep. For since a man came death, by also a man came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so on also Christ all shall be made alive. But each in his own order. Christ the first fruits, and those who are Christ at his coming. Then comes the end, when he delivers up the kingdoms of God the Father, when he has abolished all rule and authority and power. If God is going to destroy all rule, all authority, and all power, by the way, parenthetically, he said, until that time, submit to them. These same authorities and rulers that we submit to, he is going to destroy because they're evil. But he used evil for a good purpose. Submit to that, he said. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. Guys, this is a paradox. This is ironic as anything can be. And this may be the definition of irony. Submit to the authorities who are going to oppress you. Submit to the authorities who are going to destroy you. Submit to the authorities who stand against everything I stand for. Submit to them. I'm going to take care of them. You submit to them because I put them in power. And you don't just submit to authority when you agree with authority. That's not submission. Submission is when it costs you. Submission is when it is hard. Because God is going to call upon us to do things that are incredibly difficult and go against our flesh. And we've got to learn to be able to do that. And the toughest time is when a child stands against an adult and the adult is wrong, but the adult is in authority. That's one of the toughest lessons to teach a child. You submit to that authority. You honor that authority. God will take care of that authority. Your job is to submit. Your job is to honor. Oh, and by the way, son, you need to pray for him or her every night. And by the way, son, you need to give thanks for him or her every night. Because they are ministers of God to you. You better take that seriously. Guys, if we as a culture would embrace the theology that supposedly we espouse, to give honor to those that God has put in, we think we have because we voted. We think we're the power here. God is ruler of everything that is, and it all, in one way or another, honors him, even through its evil, because he uses that, as we talked about. And our job is to learn to submit. Everything about us says, let's take a gun and rise up against them. And if we would follow God, everybody could go to a peaceful demonstration. Let their anxieties and hurts be known. Be respectful of the government they are demonstrating against, which government does not have to be respectful of them. They're going to answer to God. If we would do that, we would all go home and be with our parents and our families and our children. That's what the forefathers intended. Peaceful demonstration. You have a right to free speech. You don't have a right to aggression. You have a right to peaceful assembly. You don't have a right to violence. And if I showed you a picture and I had thought about doing it, we're not going to do it because just the pictures, but to have someone in the face of someone that represents government spitting words at them and calling them the most vile and evil thing. Those same people would resent anybody getting up into their face. They would resent having their personal space violated. Yet it's my right to do that. But my question is that honor? Is that respect? But more importantly, is that submission? And no reasonable person could ever answer that. Oh yeah, that's being reasonable. That's being honorable. That's being thankful for the role of that person. This is counter-human. It's certainly counter-American. But it is so pro-God. Honor the king. Because, by the way, he carries that weapon for a reason. And that reason is not empty. That reason is God is going to maintain control of people even who are trying to be out of control. Because the planet cannot tolerate people out of control. That is anti-civilization. And God will use evil men to control evil people. We, in the midst of that, are caught in crossfire. But the reason it's called law enforcement is because it uses force. The enforcement is about a sword. In Romans 13, Paul described that. The government does not wield the sword in vain. It does it with a purpose, and that is you cross the government, you die. But to us, it's not about how far can I push this before I am killed. The point is, how can I honor them the way God has commanded us to honor them? I'm trying to remember the first demonstration that I can remember that is of the type that I've seen ever since is Kent State University. That's the first one I can remember. And I remember it was shocking to me that it got so there was such a powder keg between the demonstrators and the police and the army that shots were fired and students were killed. Somewhere in there, honor got lost. Somewhere in there, submission was thrown out. Somewhere in there, peaceful assembly was thrown out, and violence was the answer. That's the reason God demands submission, is because He hates violence, because it destroys people. People. God help this nation. But God help you and me to be examples and to speak about submission, thankfulness, honor. And I have brothers and sisters on social media who are being very dishonorable and who are being, with their words, very non-submissive. Because we've caught up into this idea that we have the right, we have God-given the right to dishonor, verbally destroy. Verbal destruction leads to violence. It always does. May God help this nation. May God bring back honor to God in this nation. If we will do that, the rest of it will take care of itself. But God says one of the most important ways to honor me is to honor everyone who has authority over me. Be those elders, principals, bosses, military, Washington, Russia, wherever it is. Submission to authority is submission to God. And the only hope for civilization in which we can live quietly and preach the word of peace. The angels cried out, peace on earth, goodwill to men. Peace has come to the earth. War ends when people accept Jesus and live like He did. He submitted to them. He submitted to Herod. He submitted to Pontius Pilate. He submitted to the Sanhedrin with almost nary a word, and he submitted to the cross, the cruel Roman implement of his own unrighteous judgment. And he did it because he gave honor to God. He did it for you and me, and ask us to do likewise. Brothers and sisters, empty your heart of anger, regardless of who the anger is against. Regardless in a woman who was shot 3 times at a demonstration. Regardless of, see, if you stand sides, then you become part of the hatred. Rather than, can't we all just honor God if we do everything we have? Can we help you in your walk? I know that you haven't been violent in a demonstration. I know that it's not time for you to repent of all the times you've taken up torches and sickles and guns. But it's a heart. It's a heart that is submissive, and it's a heart that is getting rid of hate, no matter who it is. Can we help you in your walk? There'll be men at the back, men at the front. Come with me.